And now, for a moment of clarity.
The thing that strikes me in all of this, from Donald Trump to Rudy Giuliani to Eastman and all the crap that we hear from these people, is that they sound no different than the petty criminal that Rudy Giuliani used to prosecute, who would stand in front of a reporter or a bank of cameras or a judge and claim his innocence and say how the law was being used against them and all this other stuff. And prosecutors like Rudy Giuliani back in the day would just look at them and go, yeah, okay, right. Let me tell you, we uphold the rule of law. So it's interesting and very rich to hear Rudy Giuliani on the Merchan decision on Friday say this. The case is a disaster. It's an embarrassment for New York. It's an embarrassment for Bragg. Maybe his worst embarrassment given all the people he killed as a result of his incompetence as DA. But the case should have never been charged, should have been dismissed for failure to state a crime, should have been dismissed on the theory that you don't have multiple choice verdict. You got convicted. You owe a lot of money to people that you defamed, right?
He had to give up his cars and his watches
Give up your cars up your watches, baby, your apartment, right? That wasn't the judge just sort of randomly picking you out. That wasn't the judge using the rule of law against you or the creation of lawfare and whatever the hell that means, you know. Explain to folks this sort of disinformation of the law, around the law, that, you know, these very same individuals like Rudy and Eastman once stood on the right side of. Now, because they have engaged in criminal behavior, they have the advantage of twisting the system in a way that the criminals they once prosecuted couldn't.
I think, you know, what Donald Trump has been doing for quite some time now is effectively locking in his control of the Republican members of Congress to try to remind them that they are where they are because of him, and they will be able to stay where they are because of him. The power they have, he gives to them. That's the symbolism, if you will, of what we saw just the last few days with Johnson's election. Every effort was made to make sure that happened on the first ballot. And a number of us were, you know, kind of sitting there going, oh, this is going to be a done deal on the first ballot, because you knew that Trump was going to come in at that right moment and say, okay, this is what I need to have happen. So this idea of Mike Johnson owing him and those members that he spoke to being, you know, cajoled or threatened or whatever happened, that's all part of the narrative. And I think when you broaden the lens out real quick, if I could, Andrea, to what Jackie just said, which I think was very important, to not, you know, misunderstand the realities of Capitol Hill this moment. But for me, a lot of this was less of looking back at history or history, sort of being that placeholder, but more of what Donald Trump's saying and what Republicans are saying. This is okay. What happened on January 6th 4 years ago was okay. This is how we do it now. This is how the game is going to be played in order to keep power and to control power and to make sure we get our way. Everybody, all the Republicans around town are giddy about about today. This quote peaceful transfer of power. Why? Because they won. Now, if they hadn't won, what would today be like? What would we be saying here in this moment? We'd be probably in a very similar space to 4 years ago, because that drumbeat of control for power and retribution would have been signaled. But there's no need for that now, because everything fell in place the way we wanted it to. We're getting our way. And that's going to be something to be interesting to watch play out, not just today with the events today, but with what we've already seen with how Donald Trump came in and saved Mike Johnson's speakership. So how do you think Mike Johnson is going to repay him?
Michael Steele. I feel like we should say his name every day, just, because he once existed. Mike Pence. Mike Pence.
Yeah, there was once a creature in the forest named Pence until they tried to hang him, right? The reality.
It's stunning.
It is stunning. It is. How quickly people fell for the lie. I look at that Elise Stefanik clip and I'm thinking to myself, you're such a submissive. You're just so desperate to be in the room, to be in the game, that you'll capitulate, you'll change your view. There's so many Republicans like that. The other aspect of your lead-in that I thought was fascinating and raised a question for me is not you looked at it from the political side and what John Bolton wrote there, but it also applies to the judicial side, to the same idea of loyalty and fealty. We watched 3 Supreme Court nominees go before hearings and tell us and lie to us about what they would and would not do, right? And have now shown that fealty, that submissiveness, by giving Trump all the power he will ever need, more power than any president in the country's history has ever had. Now vested in him, because all he has to do, Nicole, is to think about something he wants to do and say, oh, that's right, that'll be an official act. And I'm good. And so this is where we find ourselves at the dawning of the end of the first quarter of this century with this Republican Party, and why so many of us stand in opposition to its direction for the country, because it is anti-Constitution. It is anti-rule of law. It is a power grab for the sake of power. And that was manifest 4 years ago. And one last point. This is the first presidential election since 2020. And it feels like we've done other things in between, that there have been a presidential election or so. No, this is actually the first time since then that we've had a peaceful transfer of power. And it was only peaceful because the power was given back to the people who tried to steal it the last time.
Trump is Trump. I actually, in year 9 of covering the Trump story, I find him the most boring part of the Trump story. What is, to me...
He's become that, hasn't he?
Yeah, he's a bore. But what's terrifying is what is wrong with John Thune?
Well, so this part of what you said there triggers a question for me, and it kind of goes back to, my time as national chairman, and certainly my time even before then involved in the party and watching its evolution, its grappling with certain truths that it either did not want to address directly or tried to set aside. And my friend Eddie Glaude, who's on with us, and he and I have had this conversation over a number of years and have challenged each other in the thinking around this. And that is maybe, just maybe, that blood supply that you refer to was bad from the beginning. And that this idea that this party ever stood for those things that it fell so quickly away from really mattered. That maybe the political expediency was propping up this idea of the Constitution, propping up this idea of the rule of law, propping up this idea of individual liberties and responsibilities in a manner that would never lead it to impinge upon the individuals in this country against their rights and support the government taking control of those rights. Maybe that was the fallacy. Maybe that was the lie. And a lot of us involved in this party, yourself included, didn't see that or were just really idealistic in our view, saying, yeah, this is what we're all going for. But in reality, the subtext was, no, that's not what it's about. And then Trump pulled back that curtain and exposed the truth of what the party was always about. And actually, there's historic relevancy to that. When you look at the capitulation after the Civil War, how quickly that happened for so many Republicans who turned aside Reconstruction, the capitulation on civil rights, Republicans who turned away from the very fight for the liberty and freedom of African Americans, the capitulation for the rule of law, with allowing someone like a Nixon and now a Trump to actually be the standard bearer of the party. Barry Goldwater stripping away the party's relevancy on civil rights. The embrace, the near embrace of the John Birch Society back in the 50s. So we've been here and just didn't either accept it for what it was or thought it was actually something else. And I think now we know better.
Catch Michael Steele on The Weekend, Saturdays and Sundays, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. on MSNBC.